Dr. Brittany Martin, welcome to Bartholomew Town. Before we get into today's conversation, I'll just read from a press release that I received from the University of Rhode Island. URI's Brittany Martin joins Fines and Fees Justice Center's Advisory Board. For the past year, University of Rhode Island criminology and criminal justice professor Brittany Martin has been conducting in-depth research into how the financial and societal costs of legal fees weigh down some families and alternatives municipalities can implement to lessen that burden. Dr. Martin, again, thanks for your time. When did you first get interested in this aspect of really justice?
Thanks for having me. I actually started on a project when I was a graduate student some time ago. It was one of the first multi-state studies head by Alexis Harris at the University of Washington. I was part of the Georgia team working with Dr. Sarah Shannon, my mentor in graduate school. And we were just trying to understand how people experience monetary forms of punishment, what the landscape looks like across the United States for people who are working in the system, what they understand financial penalties can look like, and how they're kind of assessing them, enforcing them, collecting them, just this broader scope, because there hadn't been a ton of research on it previously. And we really wanted to see what different states were doing and kind of just going past this discussion of mass incarceration. We've been, looking at this as a problem in the United States for a long time. But there are these other forms of punishment that exist as well. And so we kind of wanted to do that deep dive to see what was happening there. And from my grad experience, it kind of just took off that I found so much interest in this other form of punishment, of this process that has existed in the United States for a very long time, and kind of just opening the door for Americans to see what's happening within the research and then also in the everyday, American experience space.
Wow. And when you say, the type of financial penalties we're talking about fines, we're talking about fees, potentially late fees on top of those penalties right there. What other sorts of financial penalties are you looking at or did you consider here?
Yeah, so there's a whole host of different types of financial, we can go punishments or even just user fees in some ways. So just being involved in the court process could give additional forms of money that a person may have to pay. So even if you're not convicted of a crime, you may have to pay money, let's say multiple jurisdictions across the U.S. They make it that you have to pay an application fee for having a public defender. So there's a lot of misconception out there that public defenders are free attorneys that if you're poor, you have access to, but that's actually potentially not the case in some jurisdictions. I'm thinking particular in the work I did in Georgia. People have to pay a $50 application fee. You cannot go in front of a judge and see if it can be waived. In some cases it happened, in others it did not. And then some other types of financial penalties that can happen is restitution. So this is when an individual is convicted of a crime like theft. You may have to pay back the individual for the monetary value of that thing that you stole. Or let's say from a store like Walmart, you would have to pay back what you owed, what you took to them from them. Excuse me. And some other places where money occurs is a lot of people don't know that when you go to jail in certain jurisdictions, you actually pay for being in the jail or prison setting. And so when you're released, you get a bill that you have to pay back to the correctional entities. There's also probation fees that exist that while you're under probation supervision, you would have to pay a monthly amount of money to whatever organization that is supervising you, whether that be public like we have in Rhode Island or private companies like they have in states like Georgia.
These are obviously just by design. They're going to, because they're not prorated or based on someone's income for the most part. So these are naturally going to impact people of lower income more than of higher income. So I would assume any findings would yield that. How bad is it though? How much of a burden is this aspect of criminal justice and criminal justice reform? How much of a light have you shined here, so to speak, on how many people are suffering what would be unfairly to many of their peers?
Yeah, so I would say that along with a lot of my amazing colleagues working on that multi state monetary sanction study and then some of my individual work, what we found is by and large, most people going through the system don't have means to begin with to afford the process itself. And then when we're adding on this double, triple, quadruple types of punishment when it comes financial on top of, spending time in prison or under community supervision, it kind of impacts the legitimacy of the process, right? Like, at the end of the day, most people we've spoken to, they say, I did something wrong. I should have a punishment for it. But when you're adding this additional money that I do not have and there's no ability for me to make the payment, how is that justice? Um, and so, yeah, I think when you look at each jurisdiction, it's about between 80 and 90% of defendants going through the criminal court process are deemed indigent, which means that they're below the poverty threshold. And in the United States, for a single person, that's about $18,000 a year they're making. I don't know about you, but in Rhode Island, 18 grand's not going very far.
Yeah.
Um, so owing money on top of just not having it can be detrimental to individuals' lives in multiple levels.
Wow. There's also the aspect of this, which when you continue out, so to speak, traffic violations. And now these are becoming more and more of a burden for some folks. And look, the argument is there. You put a speed camera in a place like Middletown, Rhode Island, you might see a reduction in vehicles speeding through school zones. At the same time, uh, there's also, no doubt, a financial penalty that's being distributed equally in number in terms of the monetary amount, but certainly does not reflect a person's ability to pay that. And so for some people, a $50 fine might be whatever. And for others, that may be crippling. How much of an impact do traffic violations have in this conversation?
So, traffic can have a significant impact and even more so depending on where you live. So, take a jurisdiction or a state like Georgia where traffic is actually a criminal offense. So, what I mean by that is speeding is a criminal misdemeanor charge there. If you don't just get a ticket that you pay online, you're actually pleading guilty to a misdemeanor when you make that payment in the state of Georgia and you have a criminal record after that. And it's not just, a simple $150 ticket and it's done, or the $50 you said for the speed cameras. It's essentially that you have these added fees, the user fees we were talking about before. And if you can't make those payments, they put people on probation in the state as a form of a payment plan, which adds additional money. And it kind of cycles from there. It can be a matter of people making, payments for their kids' food or to the courts. And in the work that I have done, I have found that a lot of parents are just struggling because specifically of traffic offenses. They owe it could be balloon up to $1,000 and they don't know where to go and what to do and if they should be making these payments to the courts to kind of alleviate that or take care of their children, take care of their housing bills, electric bills. That's something we talk about here a lot too. Like all of this adds up, and then adding this extra dynamic in certain states where it's not just, a civil penalty, it's a criminal one that can be really um detrimental for people's lives. And I would bring it back to Rhode Island a little bit here. We don't have traffic being criminal offenses. However, if you drive on a suspended license and get more than 3 stops, that ends up converting into a misdemeanor offense. And you can see some of that downstream consequences happening here for that specific type of traffic offense.
Is there an appetite anywhere for reform here from a legislative standpoint?
So actually, I'm really glad you brought this up. I am in the middle of a project right now, so very tentative, not published research, looking at a bill that was passed in 2022 in our state legislature in Rhode Island. Both the House and Senate passed bills that essentially eliminated court costs. So those user fees I was talking about before. We had a lot of people owing a lot of money to our court system prior to this bill being implemented, where people were owing for every charge $300 to $150 added up on top of, being sentenced to probation, to jail, to being in the ACI. And what they did was they decided anyone sentenced to 30 days or more would automatically have this cost remitted. They wouldn't have to pay it. And then if a defendant was deemed indigent, whether by having a public defender or filling out a financial affidavit in the court process, they would be able to have that money waived. So I am looking into the implications now for what we're seeing on the ground in the court process across all of the courts in Rhode Island. I have amazing undergraduate students here at URI who are working for me. They're in the courts as we speak, watching and observing, seeing what's going on. We're talking to different people working in the court system, people who have owed money previously and who do not anymore, to see what the implications are. And what the data is showing is that the amount of people who have had it waived has almost doubled over the time since the bill was implemented. So I think Rhode Island is one of the states that is kind of a pioneer in this. Most states are not getting rid of this large scale fee or cost that exists. We're seeing movement across multiple states, but not to this degree. And so to be able to be on the ground here and do the work to look at those implications, my hope is to be able to show other states, Rhode Island's done this, and maybe you all should be doing the same.
Very, very interesting. You were recently, as part of this release today, you were this release that we're discussing today, you were named to a 2-year term on the Fines and Fees Justice Center. That's a national advocacy and research organization dedicated to eliminating fees and reforming fines within the criminal legal system. That was founded back in 2018. What's the scope of your work look like there, and what do you hope to accomplish in this 2-year term?
Yeah, so for the Fines and Fees Justice Center, I've been working with them on some of their assessment of ability to pay practicing. And so they do a lot of work with jurisdictions across the United States to see, how can we assess whether people can make payments before we are telling them this is how much money you owe to the courts. Because what we found is when in the research that we're doing, most states, most smaller jurisdictions, they're collecting maybe not even 10% of what people are owed. And so one of the best indicators for people to actually be able to make payments is if you are assessing whether they have the funds to do so. And so I started off working with the Fines and Fees Justice Center on that smaller kind of informal basis, and it's turned into this advisory board position. My hope is to continue bringing the scholarship that I'm doing. I do a lot of mixed methods research, so I love the statistics to talk to. These are the prevalencies, the large scale impact when we're looking quantitatively, but also to be able to bring people's experiences and what's happening on the ground within the courts, whether it's people who are actually, enforcing and collecting money, like making a system that is more efficient for the court process, because we know the court system's inundated with cases right now and it can't handle the amount. So my hope is just to continue doing the work I'm doing and to just talk about the potential policy avenues we have to bring science into that conversation.
And one last question. We have an attorney general's race here in Rhode Island. 4 Democratic candidates will be seeking that nomination, likely will go on to become the next attorney general. One of them, Keith Hoffman, endorsed by Attorney General Nerona. He comes out of Nerona's office. Another one, Kim Ahern, recently Cannabis Control Commissioner, Joe Solomon Jr., and Jason Knight, both members of the legislature. Okay, so from your standpoint, if you had one question for each of these candidates and their understanding of criminal justice reform through the lens of fines and fees in your research, and you could ask them one question, or if I could ask them one question in a debate scenario, what would it be?
That's a good question, and it's very heavy. So
Yeah, it is heavy,
around
right?
fines and fees and Rhode Island, my question would be, how can we develop a system where we are bringing justice for victims of crime? We are keeping an efficient system, but we are also not perpetrating this system built off of having poor people have to pay money for things when they just don't have the money to do so. So really, how do we have justice and just keep with the true nature of what the system is intended for all people involved?
Yeah. Great question. And they will hopefully hear this and respond. If not, we'll certainly ask them, because I think this is a critical area to focus in on here in our own community, given that you are at our flagship university, the University of Rhode Island, doing this research. And we appreciate your time today, Dr. Brittany Martin, URI, and we'll keep in touch on this as you have developments.
Thank you so much for having me.